Good morning, Moray Rabotai. We are continuing on Masachet Avodah Zarah, and we are on Daf Chet Amud Bet. 10 lines up from the wide lines. Today's Amud is being learned. L'tzchut Yehoshua ben Diana, Yal Bad Rivka, Moshe ben Asi. Today's Amud is being learned also L'ilui Nishmat Tzipora Bad Yitzchak. And today's Amud is especially being learned for Fashel Ma'av Eden, but Rachel, that should have full recovery. Amen. We are now amidst the interesting Gemara that we started of the story, the history really of Yavan and Rome, the Greeks and the Romans. When it came to this, you have to realize that this is in the middle of Bayit Sheni really. Bayit Sheni was started under the Persian Empire. The son of Achashverosh really was the one that funded and helped and monitored the building of the Beit HaMikdash HaSheni. And for a short time it was under the Persian Empire, and then it switched basically to be under the Greeks, and then under the Romans before it was destroyed. So it was really three different empires that ruled over the Jewish people throughout the standing period of Bayit Sheni. We're going to discuss that actually in a very interesting way. Right now, the Gemara said that the way it switched from the Greeks to Romans was that the Romans made a pact with the Jews, and they took it over basically from the Greeks. In the first 26 years, they made the deal that they had made, they kept, which was, if we have the king, you will have the government, and vice versa. And afterwards, they basically knocked that out, and they started ruling over the Jews with iron fist. And the Gemara is going to ask, how do you know this? How do you know this whole 26 years that they kept their trust and so on? Says the Gemara, Esrin v'shit shenin dekamu behemrutaihu be'adei Yisrael minalan. How do we know that they kept their trust and their promise for the initial 26 years? So says the Gemara, the Amar Rav Kana keshechala Rabbi Yishmael bar Yossi, when Rabbi Yishmael Rabbi Yossi was sick, Shalach le Rabbi. You have to understand, Rabbi Yishmael Rabbi Yossi was one of the greatest Tanaim. Rabbi Yossi was one of the greatest Tanaim of all time. His halacha is always like Rabbi Yossi, but kol makom, he was a tremendous person. And Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon, the son of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, and Rabbi Yishmael Rabbi Yossi, they were friends. This is the same time. Rabbi was in the same time as them as well. So all three of them, they're peers, the same level of age, basically. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, together with Rabbi Yishmael Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon, there are stories of them as children growing up together and so on and so forth. So this is now one peer sending to another one. When Rabbi Yishmael Rabbi Yossi was ill, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi sends to ask him some questions. So says the Gemara, this is a memra from Rav Kana, Keshechala Rabbi Yishmael Rabbi Yossi, Shalchu le Rabbi Emor Lanu, Shenayim ve'shlosha dvarim she'amart lanu mishum avicha. Tell us, teach us 2 or 3 things that your father had taught before, Rabbi Yossi. So meaning we are asking for teachings of his father, Rabbi Yossi. Now, says the Gemara, Amar lehu, he said, which is very interesting, this whole back and forth. First of all, Rabbi Shimon Rabbi Yossi himself was a great personality. And secondly, this teachings that he said in the name of his father seems to be like basically historical facts, but you won't have this question if you realize that Rabbi Yossi was the author of a Tanaic work called Seder Olam. Seder Olam is basically the history of the basic history with years of how the history of the world came down from the very beginning until the current time, in the time of Tanaim. So many of these things are important information that you wouldn't necessarily know if it was not recorded properly, and Rabbi Yossi was considered an expert, or the expert in this area. So hence this teaching that he's giving in the name of his father, 180 shana kodem shenechrav habayit, prior to the destruction of the second Beit HaMikdash, 180 years, Pashta Malchut Harsha'a al Yisrael. It was the spread of Malchut Harsha'a al Yisrael. That means the Roman Empire, which is nicknamed as Malchut Harsha'a, spread over Am Yisrael. They were ruling over the Jews for 180 years. Okay. Says the Gemara, Peshana 80 years, Ad lo charaf habayit, gazru tum'a al eretz ha'amim. 80 years prior to the destruction, Chazal made a gezerah on eretz ha'amim, that any person that goes outside Eretz Yisrael will be tameh. We spoke about this before by the sugya of Efer Paraduma and so on and so forth, for those who remember. Ve'al keli zechuchit, and also on keli zechuchit midrabanan, that also needs tahara. Mem shana ad lo charav habayit, 40 years before the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash, galta Sanhedrin v'yashva la behanut. The Sanhedrin exiled itself and went to a different place called Chanut. Now we have to understand why. That is exactly the Gemara is going to speak about it. Lemay hilcheta, the first wide line. Why do we need these facts for halacha? Amar Bitzchak bar Avdimi, lomar shelo danu dine knasot. To teach you that the Bedin wanted not to be obligated to judge dine knasot. That means the laws of Choshen Mishpat, for instance, or any other laws of Knas, even in areas of Eben HaEzer, for a, examples of it would be a Knas, you have Knas Midoraita of a violated girl, and so on and so forth. So the Dinei Knasot need to be done by a Bedin of Smuchim, by a Bedin that has Smicha from generation after generation, traced back to Moshe Rabbeinu, giving smicha to Yehoshua. So, if you don't have smicha, you cannot judge dinei kenasot. Which this is a very interesting thing. There are multiple things that you cannot do if you are not a dayan that is nismach, that is musmach from a smicha that went on generation after generation. And nowadays, of course, we don't have smicha. The smicha that Rabbanim get nowadays is just a sign that they have learned enough things that they could lead a community. But it's not really the smicha that was in yesteryear, in the times of the Beit HaMikdash, and times prior. So there's a whole question, how do we do certain judgments that needs a bedin from the Torah? It's not so simple how we do it. Now, for money matters is much easier because there are concepts in halacha that when it comes to dinei mamonot, you could have a tenai of bedin, hefker bedin, hefker. You could have conditions made by bedin that could govern things even nowadays. But when it comes, for instance, to conversion, to other things that need a bedin, because mishpat ketiv behu, then it becomes much more questionable. How do we do those things when we have not continued really the chain of smicha from Moshe Rabbeinu and down? It's a fascinating sugya by itself, but nevertheless, a bedin of smuchim is needed for dinei kenasot. Actually, the Rosh brings in Ba'Metzia that nowadays, in the name of the Geonim, that nowadays in Bavel we don't judge dinei kenasot. Nowadays we don't have smuchin. So anything that in Choshen Mishpat is considered kenas is not considered the actual damage that was caused, but it is a fine. It's a knas that's added additional to the actual damage. Those things we don't deal with. But nevertheless, says the Gemara, they didn't want to deal with the kenasot, and hence they removed themselves from the actual place of Chatzigor and Agul. The next to the place of Sanhedrin was right next to the Beit HaMikdash. They removed themselves from that place and they exiled themselves to a different place. Now, why that helps, the Gemara is going to just discuss that in a moment. But says the Gemara, you think that they did this because they didn't want to deal with Dinei Knasot, which would basically suggest that decades before the Churban HaBayit, they already were not dealing with Dinei Knasot. That's what you're suggesting, right? So says the Gemara, V'hamar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Rav, Rabbi Yehuda said in the name of Rav, Bram Zachur Oto Ha'ish Letov, Rabbi Yehuda ben Baba Shemu. One of the Hasidim in the Gemara is known as Rabbi Yehuda ben Baba. One of the Tanaim, and he was a Rebbe of some very famous Tanaim, as we're going to just see in a moment. So he should be blessed and remembered with blessing. She'ilmalehu, because if it wasn't because of him and his sacrifice, his Mesirut Nefesh, nishtakhu dinei knasot me'Yisrael, we would not have dinei knasot any longer. Why? Says the Gemara, nishtakhu. What do you mean nishtakhu? That they would be forgotten halachot of knasot. Legresinu, learn them. Write them in a sefer, write them in a Gemara or in a Mishnah, and teach it to the students. What do you mean they would be forgotten if it wasn't because of him? Ela batlu dinei knasot miYisrael. You should say they would be nullified. In other words, no one would be able to judge dinei knasot had it not been because of Rabbi Yehuda ben Baba. So what did he do that he saved the day for dinei knasot? Says the Gemara, Shegazra Malchut Harsha'a Gezerah, because the Roman Empire made a decree that anybody, they wanted to stop this whole chain of Mesorah. They wanted to stop the ability for the Jews to have Talmidei Chachamim Musmachim, that they are connected with the previous generation. They wanted to stop this whole thing. So how did they do it? Kol ha-somech yaharek. Anyone, any rabbi that gives semicha will be killed. V'kol ha-nismach yaharek. Anyone that gets semicha will be killed. Ve'ir shesomchim ba techarev. They went all out. The city that would be a place to the semicha would be completely uprooted and desolated and destroyed. They wanted to enforce it, that people would tell on them, and no one would hide it. So a place that they would do it in will be destroyed. Even not just the city, but even a tchum, which is the adjacent area to the city, the immediate area right after the boundaries of the city, that also will be destroyed. Ma'asa Rabbi Yehuda ben Baba. Rabbi Yehuda ben Baba was the last living person that had semicha and had the ability to bestow that semicha and give it over to the next generation. So what did he do? Halach v'yashav ben shnei harim gedolim. He found a place that was not a city, was not a boundary of a city. He went between two massive mountains. That, we're going to uproot the mountain. Nobody lives there. It's not a city. Uben shnei ayarot gedolot. That this was found between two large cities. Ben bet tchume Shabbat. And he was right outside each one of their tchums. So he found in the geography the exact spot that you could have given semicha, and no one could hold anyone accountable for that but yourself, of course, right? He was risking his life. But it was not in a city, it was not in a tchum, so he was not endangering anybody else's lives. So says the Gemara, This was Ben Usha leSefaram. V'samach sham chamisha zkenim. He gave smicha to 5 zekenim. Who are these people? Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Shimon, Rabbi Elazar, all the top Tanaim of the next generation. Where did they get their smicha from? They got it from this story of Rabbi Yehuda ben Baba. So says the Gemara, Rabbi Elazar ben Shamua was the last one, and Rab Avia Mosif Af Rab Nechemia. Rab Avia adds that it was also Rab Nechemia that was present, and he got smicha from Yehuda ben Baba. So says the Gemara, Kevan sheikiru bahem oivim. They had guards and they recognized what's happening. They saw these chachamim are traveling, and they sent to chase them. They sent to check on them. Amar lahem, they saw that they're coming for them. So he tells his talmidim, he tells these 5 Tanaim, Banai Rutsu, say, run away. Leave me here, I'm an old man, and just run for your lives. I want you to survive. Amru lo Rabbi, v'ata mateh alecha. What's going to happen with you if we just leave you here and go? Amar lahem, he told them, Hareni mutal lifnehem ke'even she'en la hofchin. So I'm old already, there's nothing to do with me, really. It's like, I'm old, I have lived my life, I can't run anyways, just leave me and go. So says the Gemara, Amru, lo zazu misham at shenasu legufo gimel meot lulaniot shel barzel. They ran, but as they still could see him, the Romans caught up with Rabbi Yehuda ben Baba, and they killed him. They killed him with piercing his body with 300 lulaot shel barzel, 300 spears. Now, Rashi many times says that number 300 is a language of guzma. It's exaggeration. Was it exactly 300? Was it 299? It doesn't mean necessarily it was 300, but it means they filled his body with pierces of spears. They killed him like that. So says the Gemara, they made his body like a colander. It was full of pierces and holes of spear lulaniot shel barzel that they pierced him with. So says the Gemara, basically the story is brought in the Gemara to say he was the one that saved the day for the Nekenasot. And this is right prior to Churban Bet HaMikdash. So what do you mean that 40 years before they stopped the Nekenasot? It must be that they had the Nekenasot. Because the Gemara says, if it wasn't because of Rabbi Yehuda ben Baba, nitbatelu di Nekenasot mi Israel. So that basically says that because of him was no nitbatel. They kept going with the Nekenasot, even right before the Churban. So says the Gemara, this is what we mean to say. Amar Rab Nachman bar Yitzchak, lo tema di Nekenasot ela shelo danu dine nefashot. They did do the Nekenasot. What they didn't do, what they meant to stop, and therefore they moved the Sanhedrin, was dine nefashot. They did not judge cases of capital punishment. Dine nefashot they stopped doing. Why? My tama. Kevan de chazu de nefishi lehu rotzchin. Because they saw there were so many murder cases. This is, again, it's a very interesting topic, because this is, of course, talking about the second Beit HaMikdash. The Gemara in Yuma Daf Tet says that the first Beit HaMikdash was destroyed because you had the 3 cardinal sins of Avodah Zarah, Gilui Arayot, Shuvah Damim. The second Beit HaMikdash was destroyed because of Sinat Chinam, that everyone knows, right? But here we're talking about second Beit HaMikdash, and yet you see there were many cases of murder that the Beit Din had to deal with, and they felt that they cannot do justice to properly judge these cases, because if you want to judge, the Gemara says that a Beit Din that would kill somebody once in 7 years or even 7 years will be considered, not a careful Beit Din. They're very, very meticulous and methodical. They will give it time, they will research it well. But if you have cases coming in, we don't deal with a very interesting tshuva that Rabbi Moshe Feinstein wrote to the mayor of New York City. He was asking Rabbi Moshe Feinstein to explain to him capital punishment in Judaism, right? And he explains to him that capital punishment is not us trying to hold the matters in our hands. We believe, like the Gemara says, that even after the capital punishment was nullified, right now here in this Gemara, still HaKadosh Baruch Hu sees to it that they are carried out. So the Gemara says, someone that is chayav skila, he'll get into an accident and he crush himself to death or he'll fall off the cliff. Someone that is chayav Serifah, who will have a fire, someone that's chayav this. Each one of them, HaKadosh Baruch Hu still carries out very similar to how the Beit Din would have carried out that chiyuv of the 4 types of capital punishment. We're not trying to take matters in our own hand. The reason that there is such a thing is for people to be afraid and to think twice before they want to commit an averah. That's why the Beit Din down here in this world operates as they do. Otherwise, it's not that we need us to carry out the din of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Hashem is pretty capable of carrying out his own din himself. So therefore, says Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, we are extremely careful not to carry out a capital punishment unless we are convinced beyond any shadow of a doubt that this person deserves capital punishment. Now, the issues of capital punishment in the Goyish world out there, and the government actually having a hand to be and control over capital punishment is a very, very well debated subject. On one hand, of course, everyone understands that there are sins that they deserve at least capital punishment. But on the other hand, sometimes when you give this power to the government, not everyone that deals with it is going to be a responsible person, and it becomes misused and abused, the power. And that becomes basically the challenge, right? Whenever you give excessive power to an element in the community, you have to be very sure that it's not abused. So therefore, by us, we have built-in system of not abusing this power, and there are many things built in to the edut that you need, to the type of Beit Din that you need, that even if one person defends it, it can't be killed, and so on and so forth. When you study those laws in Masechet Sanhedrin, it almost would be impossible to kill anyone unless they want to be killed deliberately. Because according to one shita, if you say, well, you have to give a hatra, right? You have to give hatra for someone to get killed. He said, don't do this, because if you do, you'll be killed. And according to one shita, if he doesn't look you in the eyes and say, yes, I know, and afal piken, I'm doing it. If he doesn't say that, just keeps quiet, he's still not chayav mita. So this is one shita. There are many other such things built in. So a person will be killed only if they are trying to commit suicide, basically, right? So that's what Rabbi Moshe Feinstein writes to the mayor of New York City, explaining capital punishment in Judaism, which of course it was a very charged tshuva, and you have to be very careful. You have to be Rabbi Moshe Feinstein to be able to answer it, but a fantastic piece of work, which is very much related to understanding this Gemara, because you say, well, why would Sanhedrin run away? The reason is because they felt, rightfully so, responsible for paskening every psak of dinei nefashot. You're killing somebody, you're ending someone's life. You better know that this person actually is chayav according to dinei Torah. And they were not able to handle the volume of questions of dinei nefashot that were coming to the table. They said, we're not doing this. Let HaKadosh Baruch Hu handle it. And they left the Lishkat HaGazit, where the Sanhedrin was built to be, next to the Beit HaMikdash. And the Gemara says, Amru, mutav nigli mi makom lemakom. It's better for us to exile ourselves and not have to deal with dinei nefashot, ki hechi delo lichayevu. In order that we should not be dealing with dinei nefashot, and let HaKadosh Baruch Hu handle his world. So says the Gemara, Dichtiv, how do you know that if they exile
1 mile away, then they don't have to deal with it. The pasuk says you should do as the Sanhedrin paskins for you from that place. What do you have to say from that place? Just say V'asita al pi hadavar asher yagidu lecha. The min hamakom is absolutely not necessary, unless it's coming to teach you that that place is the only place that the Beit Din could deliver the psak of dinei nefashot the way they did. Melamed shamakom gorem. It teaches, this pasuk is coming to teach that the makom of Sanhedrin being in Lishkat HaGazit is what causes you to be able to do dinei nefashot. You only could paskin dinei nefashot if the Sanhedrin is residing next to Beit HaMikdash, next to the kedusha of the mizbeach of the Beit HaMikdash. If they are in just a random place, that's siyata dishmaya that you need, that the Shekhinah resides with Sanhedrin, resides with, Ba'adat Kel, with the Dayanim, to be able to paskin dinei nefashot does not exist. You need it to be in the intensity of the presence of Shekhinah. Therefore, you move away from there's no dinei nefashot. Says the Gemara, Melamed shamakom gorem. Now, the Gemara goes back. Remember, we're amidst still dealing with how do you know the 26 years, right? How do you know the 26 years were there? So says the Gemara, 180 vetulo. We just learned in the name of Rabbi Yossi that it was 180 years before the Beit HaMikdash that the Romans governed over the Jews. Says the Gemara, it was only 180 years? It wasn't 180, it was more. And I'll prove it to you, says the Gemara. V'hatani Rabbi Yossi, we learned in the name of Rabbi Yossi, it is a braita in the name of Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi Omer, Malchut Paras bifnei habayit 34 shana. We were under the Persian Empire. Again, as we mentioned, it was assisted, the building of the Beit HaMikdash, by the son of Achashverosh that funded and helped, assisted to build the actual building, and it paid for it, of the second Beit HaMikdash. So for the next 34 years after that, we were still under the Persian Empire, which is known as Parasu Madai, because Koresh and Daryavesh, they took over from Belshazzar, from the Babylonian Empire, the great-grandson of Nebuchadnezzar. They took, and it was an overnight transfer of power. It turned into the Malchut Madayu Paras. Now, and in Megillat Esther, it's called Madayu Paras, right? Why? Because they were together, they were partners, and actually he gave, he was a tremendous personality, and he gave the Madai to be first. He said, you go first, and he was only a king for 2 years before he died, and he basically was transferred to Malchut Paras. And that stayed until 34 years after the building of the Beit HaMikdash. Malchut Yavan b'fnei habayit 180. And then afterwards was 180 years of Yavan after Paras. And after that was Malchut Chashmonai 103. Umalchut Bet Hurdus 103. It was 103 years of the Chashmonaim being kings over the Jews, and 103 additional years of Malchut of Hurdus. So how much is that? And again, Chashmonaim and Hurdus is basically under the Roman Empire. So that's 206 years, not 180 years. So there's a discrepancy of 26 years over here between the way Rabbi Yossi said it in our Gemara, in the story of his son before his death, telling over what his father had said, and the braita that we learned in the name of Rabbi Yossi Omer. So which one is true? There's a 26-year discrepancy in the amount of years that the Romans governed over Eretz Yisrael, it seems like. So says the Gemara, you know how it works? It's like this. Mikan va'elach, let's sum this up. Mikan va'elach se v'chashov kama shanim achar churban habayit alma matan v'shet. It was 206 years that they governed. Ve'at amrat 180. You said it was 180 years. So it says the Gemara, Ela esrin v'shit shenin kamu be'emrutayu. 26 first years, because Rabbi Yossi said the 180 years was the years that they governed, ruled with iron fist over the Jews, right? So says the Gemara, yes, those are the years that we were under the command of the Roman Empire. But 26 years prior to that, already the government of Yavan, of Greece was ended. It was only 180 years, and it ended. But we were not under the command of the Romans yet. Romans were ruling, but we were not under them. We were not subordinated to them. We were working together with them. Because Rabbi Yossi said that it was 180 years that we were subordinated to the Romans. And the other Rabbi Yossi said that the Romans had 206 years. So what's the difference? The difference is the first 26 years, they were not ruling over us. We were working together. And that's how we know that the first 26 years, they kept the pact that they had with the Jews. They actually stayed true to their promise. And then afterwards, they basically ended it and ruled over the Jews with iron fist. So it says that's basically the story of the history line of the way we know it. And there are few small important details in the Gemara that we did today, which is really the Agadic part of it, which is fascinating and very interesting. Bezrat Hashem, we'll come back to this tomorrow before we start the new Gemara. Chazak Baruch.